So hi, everyone. My name is Sal Bermann, and I'm the U of M's Chief Information Security Officer. In addition to my day job, I'm honored to be part of the Dissonance Organizing Committee. On behalf of this multidisciplinary group of faculty and students, I want to welcome and thank you all for being a part of Dissonance, conversations at the confluence of technology, policy, privacy, security, and law. This morning's TikTok Boom event epitomizes the dissonance spirit, which in addition to the filmmaker includes a panel of faculty, staff, and students from LS&A, their creative writing and literature program, their film, television, and media department, faculty from the School of Information, and staff from the University of Michigan Museum of Art, as well as myself and Svetla, part of ITS. This program is actually made possible through sponsorship and the hardworking staff of ITS. So thank you, Svetla, thank you, Jen, and all the other staff that have gone to put this together. We're so honored to have Shalini Kantayya here with us. We loved watching and discussing her film Coded Bias at a 2021 Dissonance event, so it's amazing to have her virtually here as part of today's program. I hope you all enjoyed the free screening of TikTok Boom as much as I did. It was an incredibly powerful overview of the multi-threaded issues posed by both TikTok specifically and social media in general. From better understanding the influencer generation, to social media addiction, to privacy, to geopolitics, the film provided so much food for thought. So what did you think? What affected you? I hope you're ready to engage our panel and discuss in more depth. Aside from being able to interact with the panel, I encourage you to join the conversation on Twitter at UMishTech. Use hashtag UMishTalks to tweet along. To quote the cover of this past March's Atlantic magazine, reality is blurred, boredom is intolerable, and everything is entertainment. Svetla, please introduce yourself and take it away.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Svetla Sytch, and I'm the Assistant Director of Privacy and IT Policy here at the University of Michigan. I also help lead the university's education and engagement efforts around topics like privacy, security, appropriate use of technology. Shalini, thank you so much for joining us today. It's indeed a unique opportunity to hear from the film director herself, as we've all spent the last couple of weeks getting acquainted with your film.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to be in conversation with such a distinguished panel. And I'm so grateful to everyone participating today, because it's my deep belief that conversations like this one have the power to spark change. And so conversations like this one give my work meaning, and I'm so grateful to be here.
Wonderful. Well, as Sol mentioned, we also have a really diverse panel that's joining Shalini in a conversation about her film, TikTok Boom, and many of the important issues that it raises. First of all, we have two University of Michigan students. We have Maddie, who is an undergraduate student at the College of Literature, Science, and the Arts, that we affectionately call LS&A. She's majoring in creative writing and literature, and she's also a writer for the Michigan Daily. In fact, she got discovered for this panel as part of an article that she recently published on teenage stardom in the digital age. We also have Tiani Zhai, also an undergraduate at LS&A. She is majoring in film, television, and media, as well as psychology. She's also an intern at Sol's in my department, Information and Technology Services. Tiani today brings a unique perspective to the panel. She's not only a potential future colleague of Shalini's, but she's also a former TikToker with a following of, 50,000 people in China. So really excited to hear from her as well. We have Dave Choberka, who's the Mellon Foundation Curator for University Learning and Programs at the University of Michigan Museum of Art. Dave recognizes TikTok as a unique medium of creative expression and has been actually using it as a museum marketing tool. Dave also can offer his parental perspective, as his son is an active user on the platform. And last but not least, we're honored to welcome two University of Michigan faculty members. Their research and scholarship will greatly contribute to today's conversation. We have Dr. Nicole Ellison. She is the Carl Weick Collegiate Professor of Information at the University's School of Information, and her research encompasses many aspects of social media, and her current broad focus is on well-being and technology use, which of course is one of the themes in Shalini's film. We also have Dr. Sarah Murray. She's an Assistant Professor of Film, Television, and Media at LS&A. She studies media as they emerge and stabilizes popular social practices in historically specific moments. She also explores how media and technologies foster recognition, vitality, and livelihood. Before we jump into our conversation, just as a reminder to our audience, this event is being recorded. The recording will be posted on the Safe Computing event page next week. As you follow the conversation, please submit any questions that you might have for Shalini, for any of our panelists through the webinar Q&A section. And without further ado, welcome to today's Dissonance event. Shalini, I'll open up the conversation with you. You had shared in the media that you discovered TikTok during the COVID-19 pandemic. And indeed, you found it so addictive that you ended up deleting the app. As a reminder to our audience, the pandemic started right around the time when your film Coded Bias premiered at the Sundance Film Festival. So you probably had some idea of what you were getting yourself into. By then you were familiar with the technology, the algorithms, and potentially the bias that would encounter on them. What is it in the technology and the algorithms that make TikTok so powerful and so compelling to users?
Well, I think, as you said, I started using TikTok during the pandemic and was just amazed by how sticky the technology was. It was like a social media app like no other, and how quickly over a short period of time, it came to know my unique interests. And I'm quirky. And so it came to know, the strange restaurants I like, what city I live in. It almost seemed to know my ethnicity within days of me starting to use the app. And what the app is doing, of course, with any of these social media companies, we don't know what's in the special sauce of these very powerful recommendation algorithms. In some ways, TikTok's recommendation algorithms is similar to YouTube. But in another sense, it is stickier if you've ever used it. And what it's doing is it's pulling from data from your phone. We know that it is pulling things as sensitive as your biometric data, face prints, voice prints when you're using it. It's deducting your location, where you are, oftentimes your gender, what phone you're using when you use the app. It may be pulling from your Google searches and other apps that you have on your phone when you're not using TikTok. And over a series of time creates a really compelling sort of profile, a psychological profile of who it thinks you are. And it's getting really accurate information of how long you're watching videos, because it's not just who we say we are. Like on Facebook, it's about who we say we like. It is about our unconscious mind, what is holding our attention even longer than we know it. So even though we say we like, the Netflix algorithm was adjusted because people said they liked really highbrow documentaries, but on the weekend wanted to watch, a lowbrow rom-com. And so what TikTok is doing is able to get real information based on just how many seconds a video holds your attention. And it often packages you in demographics of people like you and sends out that information. And unlike any other platform, you see influencers, just videos going viral, reaching new audiences, unlike we've seen on any other social media platform.
And they gain fame overnight almost. I think, Tiani, you had a similar story as well in terms of your experience with the app, but more from a content creator perspective. Would you like to share your experience? And, spoiler alert, you ended up leaving the app. Can you tell us why?
Yeah, for sure. I have a lot to say about it. It's got to be long. So being a TikToker is definitely an interesting experience in my life. And even though I quit, I'm not regretting it because it really taught me a lot. And like Shalini, I started using it during the pandemic. I was a high school junior back then. It was a long time ago. It was right at the worst time of COVID outbreak. Everything was shut down. I was stuck at home. And remember, I'm from China. And apparently I didn't have a lot of homework to do at that time. So I got online and downloaded Douyin, the original Chinese version of TikTok, for the first time. And by that time, Douyin has actually already been popular for 2 years, but COVID definitely created a boom for it because everything just gone online. And so I started using it. And absolutely, I got addicted to it like everybody else does. I typically scroll through Douyin for at least an hour once I open it. After a few weeks, I started to consider being a content creator. I saw all those people could easily get famous on Douyin, so I thought, why not me, right? Then I decided to go do something like stand-up comedy, not necessarily standing up. I was sitting the whole time, like right now, but just the point is to tell some jokes I wrote, like a Chinese talk show, and each video is about a minute long. So within 1 month, I got 50K followers, which is a pretty decent amount since I was doing it all by myself. I didn't have the support from MCN, multi-channel network, like many others do. So I was doing it pretty good. However, I decided to quit when I was getting more and more successful, and I got basically 2 reasons for that. So first off, staring at the statistics of videos drove me crazy. When you got one video that has gone viral, you will want another one. I remember the first time one of my videos got 2 million views and 300K likes. I was so happy. And I also started to care about my statistic every single day since then. I will literally open Douyin every 20 minutes to see if the views and followers grow. It was just toxic. And sometimes the algorithm just don't favor your don't favor your content. It's totally not your fault, but you will be so upset. And when you don't receive the expected amount of engagement and attention, and you kind of have the pressure from social comparison that you are seeing other content creators producing similar content as yours gain millions of likes every day, and you are not getting that. So you become like more and more impatient and nervous. And I was in such an anxious mood that my emotion was completely depending on the numbers. So to save my mental health, I decided to quit Douyin. This was my biggest reason. But secondly, I was thinking about like what I'm gonna do with my account 3 years later. I knew that I'll go to the United States. I'll be in college by then. Oh, it's actually exactly 3 years from now. It was March 2020. This is such a coincidence. Yeah, I couldn't imagine if I was still doing that right now. Like, am I still telling jokes? Do I even have time for this in college? Apparently not. Is it gonna be my job? Is it gonna be a career? I am not feeling that. I still want to do film and TV. So if the answer to all these questions is no, I may finally quit it anyway. So why don't I just stop it before it's too late? And I was exactly afraid to be in the same state as Deja in the film. And you remember she couldn't even live without TikTok or social media because now it has become like tightly connected to the essential parts of her life, like financial stability. So I don't want to wait until I lose the freedom to choose. So after a month of being a TikToker, I deleted all my videos and left a statement in my bio saying that I'm gonna be busy applying to college for the rest of the year, and thank you for liking my content. And I felt completely relieved after doing that, and all my anxiety and nervousness were just gone. And I also deleted Douyin or TikTok and never used it again because it was just too addictive. And even when I watched some knowledge-based video which make me feel so good, I was only like receiving pieces of information that were not gonna grow me anyway. So this is just my story with TikTok. And still, I'm not saying that everyone shouldn't use it or like create content on it. What I mean is like you can easily lose control of yourself in such a smart platform that has a complete grasp of your psyche, especially when you're attracted to the advantages of TikTok and the chances it could make you famous and rich. You want to step back a little bit to be aware of the potential danger and risks that come with it and be prepared for that. Yeah.
I think most of us can agree that we all experienced quite a bit of disconnect around this time this year, and especially a couple weeks into it with everything shutting down and everybody moving to online school, online work. So there's something to the pandemic that possibly contributed to the popularity of the app. But Sarah, I wonder, you explore how media gains popularity in historically specific moments in time. Can we contribute all of this to COVID-19 and our isolation, or are there other processes and social developments at work here that have allowed for a phenomenon like TikTok to proliferate like this?
Yeah, that's a great question, which kind of lends itself to a more historical look at the ways in which other communications technologies have come into social life at specific moments. So sure, I think there's a lot to attribute to a global pandemic and the ways in which we were already prepared for a technology like this because of the ways that we are, excuse me, familiar with the codes and conventions and affordances of the platforms that we've been so intimate with since, 2006, 2007, when we start to see the rise of a lot of social. So in some ways, yeah, we already had the language for this, and that language combined with a moment works quite well. We could compare this to other moments across time. A lot of it might sound strange to say, but I was thinking a lot about broadcast media while I was watching the documentary. Shalini, I wonder if I wonder what your relationship is to older communications technologies, but broadcast media was very nationally specific. It very much tried to speak to the ways in which people were understanding of liveness in the moment, or of entertainment, or of what citizens as communicators and consumers and users were needing in a particular moment. So I certainly think that we can do both, where we can see the ways in which COVID really impacted the popularity of something like this, but we can also see how all platforms and all communications technologies are sort of swept up in the moment, and what people are needing in that moment, for sure.
Shalini, did you want to respond to Sarah's question around your relationship to broadcast media and kind of your background in that?
Yes, I mean, I think why I've been so fascinated with TikTok and what I think is so unique to it, and why I'm so grateful to have this conversation, is we've never seen a social media sort of global platform come from a country that's not democratic. And the sort of unique questions that TikTok poses and continues to pose. I mean, the Biden administration is continuing to have this conversation around TikTok national security issues. But I think the thing that was so unique about making this documentary, and from other algorithms that I perhaps have looked at in past films, is that this is one that really speaks to Gen Z. The New York Times had reported that at one time, a third of TikTok's users were under 14 years old. And I think that what is unique to TikTok are really two things. One is its impact on kids. And what I am concerned about is that we are taking the most powerful, persuasive recommendation algorithms in the history of the world and unleashing them with almost no oversight on brains that are still developing. A kid's brain is not fully developed, a young adult's brain, until their early 20s. And so what I worry about is this very persuasive technology and its impact on a young person's development. And we've not studied this. It's a mass uncontrolled experiment. And, in the 1990s, when, we were getting our first, like the Child Online Protection Act and some of the protections we have in our broadcast media to protect children, it was because we were getting research from all these areas, child psychologists and others were giving us the data that said, a child can't tell the difference between the sugary cereal and Elmo. It just knows it loves Elmo and can't tell the difference between those two things. So we need to separate those things in television for children. And children need certain protections in our media. And what I worry about is now we've got influencers peddling pharmaceuticals and we don't have any sort of protections in place. The other thing that I worry about when it comes to, this goes with all our social media, is just the mass of misinformation around these recommendation algorithms and their impact on our democracy, even the ones that are governed here in Silicon Valley. And I had never thought I would see the day where a democratically elected American president, where we had a violent coup d'etat on a democratically elected American president. And that happened because of misinformation and these rabbit holes of recommendation algorithms. And I just want to note that there are two cases going before the Supreme Court, one against Twitter and one against Google, YouTube's parent company, to look at exactly this. And it's my belief that this should actually go before Congress and not just before the Supreme Court. But that these recommendation algorithms are protected here in the US by Section 230 of the SEC, which basically says that technology companies are not responsible for what's on their platforms. This is very different than China, by the way. And so, we have these two Supreme Court cases that have may overturn this 20-year legislation, I hope, because it was people who basically whose kids were victims of terrorism, and platforms like YouTube and Twitter were promoting this content, this pro-ISIS content. And so it's raising these bigger questions about what responsibilities and protections that were given to us by traditional broadcasters, but don't extend to this online community. And the other thing I just want to say is that, it also talks about, I think, the way this technology works with the most primal parts of our brain. And I'm very concerned with that, particularly in kids. And the other thing that is unique to TikTok is it coming from outside of Silicon Valley. And while what I think it raises is, where is our data going? And we don't have a common set of global protections yet. And our data travels all over the world. And we have Europe that has some data protections and has a framework for putting data rights in a civil rights and human rights framework. You have the US, which is essentially a wild, wild west. It's an industry that is operating, it's sort of like the pharmaceutical industry, and there's no FDA approvals or indications. It's like an automotive industry with no seatbelt laws, is what I would liken the tech industry to. And then you have China, which it has a different model of how it's dealing with, but and if you also look at China, they've limited the use of their kids Monday through Friday or during their school week can only use Douyin, the Chinese version of TikTok, for 40 minutes a day. And we don't yet have those protections. And that's what we're discussing here. And so I think the difference I would make between more traditional media and this new forms that we're experiencing is that I believe it's more powerful. It targets you by name. It knows your vulnerabilities. It knows your economic level. It knows things that are so personal to you and can sort of pull on it knows what will trigger you, those things in your brainstem that will hold your attention. It can manipulate you. It's a very powerful AI and is different than just getting a commercial on television. And so those are the ways that I would sort of differ, traditional technologies from this one.
A lot of food for thought. Was it last week that TikTok introduced this limit of 1 hour that obviously can be overridden, but anybody who's under 18 has 60 minutes a day on the app, and otherwise they have to actually take action to extend that time frame. But what essentially the company is doing is under pressure to try to self-regulate, or at least provide evidence of self-regulation in this void of a comprehensive law. So with that in mind, we actually do have a question that came through our Q&A here in the Zoom webinar. As we don't have this comprehensive law in place, and beyond having these regulations, what is the need for broad education of youth on these topics, on algorithms, on everything that's going on behind the scenes of these applications? And TikTok is just one of them. I think one of the people that you interviewed in your film made the point that, you know, the film is about TikTok, but we shouldn't necessarily be putting that one app and spotlighting it. There are others that engage in similar activities. So Dave, I want to pull on you, and maybe we can ask all the panelists to share their opinion as well, but you have a unique perspective of somebody who's used TikTok as a marketing tool in your profession, and you also have a child, your son, who's on that platform. So what are your thoughts around this digital citizenship 2.0, as our audience member put it?
Oh, I mean, that's a really good question. And I mean, I mainly think about that in the context of my son's use of the platform, because he uses it very regularly and uses it to like have a community of people that he engages with. You know, he like his mother and I actually, like, we didn't get him a phone until he was about 12 or 13. And so he got kind of like maybe a slower on-ramp to using social media than a lot of other people did. And then he kind of started to use it at the time when young people had no interest in Facebook. They thought that was like old people stuff, right? He used Instagram a little bit, but he didn't really start to use social media a whole lot until TikTok. And he's actually told me that some of the things that we told him early on about being cautious about people trying to influence him was actually really helpful for him to kind of negotiate that landscape. But he's actually, like, I actually had an hour and a half conversation with him last week about his use of TikTok in preparation for this. And I talked with him about a lot of the issues of algorithmic sorting that are brought up in the documentary, the issue of censorship. And he said all those things are totally real, but he basically sees it as a media entertainment platform. He likes cat videos. He also says, you know, you have to train the algorithm to give you what you want. Like when you first start, it's just a horror show of like really weird political ideologies and sexualization. And then he said, you train it for a little while and then you're in queer TikTok and you're in a good place. And you're like in a community of people of like minds with one another. He's interested in like humor, people that do textile work. So it's all about kind of fun and entertainment and comedy for him. And he says, if you're looking for a political outlet, a political voice in that space, you're going to be disappointed because it's not conducive to constructive conversations about important political things. You know, I feel very heartened that we kind of helped him to be like somewhat critical of these things he's consuming, and that's allowed him to really enter it in a way that I think he doesn't have overly high expectations of some sort of democratic social transformation that these things are going to provide. And that actually sort of crystallized some thoughts that I had about it. Like this is a media entertainment platform that's owned by this like gigantic private corporation. When we think that we're going to get positive democratic social change out of that, I feel like we're kind of participating in advertising this platform to ourselves. And it's a bit of a fool's errand. Like it's an extension of existing harms. It's limited in the ways that it can overcome those, but it does offer some new opportunities for that. But in general, I think we have to have like modest expectations about these things. And just going back to this question about preparing children for it, you know, legislation and all these things are really important, but education and parenting are also really important. But then again, I don't want to be like, oh, you know, it's just up to the parents to train the kids to do it right. These are really complicated things, but I would definitely say like all these things have to play a role in helping us to be thoughtful consumers of these entertainment platforms.
Yeah, and it obviously a family is probably one of the first places where things start, possibly school as well. And Maddie, I'm going to pull you in the conversation as well, because again, you write for the Michigan Daily, and your focus is technology and digital media. Your article that was specific to TikTok was featuring this young boy playing Minecraft in a astronaut helmet of all things. And as you put it, he had hit the algorithmic jackpot. I'm just curious as to your thoughts to kind of play off of what Dave was saying around educating young adults and children on how to interact with these apps. What sort of messages do you have for your audience? What was the message behind your article?
Yeah, I think a big reason why I wrote that article was I was so interested in this kid that literally went insanely viral overnight because one person tweeted about him. But even by the time I got to him, he was already like on the decline again. It had been a few days of like high stakes, incredible popularity. And by the time my article was published, he had kind of not flatlined, but kind of evened back out in terms of virality, which was really interesting. And I was also so interested in him because I think he said he's 16, but he also has a very strict handle on his audience, on what is and isn't allowed in his streams, on what he posts, on how much he shares, which I really admired. And just the more research I started doing about young people on social media, the more, I think I kind of always knew that like social media and being an influencer, especially for young people, has its dangers and its pitfalls. And even I have, when I was probably 18, I was like, influencer would be kind of a fun career. But then the more research I did, I was like, this is terrifying. This sounds like a terrible world to be a part of. And even like I used to use TikTok probably my freshman, sophomore years of college, and after a while deleted it because I was like, this is destroying my life. This is taking all of my time. And I think I had a similar feeling when I was watching the documentary of listening to actual influencers talk about it's this much work. It is this much always being on as a human being and having to just constantly face criticism for existing. That was so scary to me. And so I think it's a necessary, an underbelly that like needs to be shown to kids and young people on social media of this is actually an extremely demanding and draining world to be a part of. I think in terms of education, it's also a question of modernizing education, of how much do we begin including units and lessons about social media in high school computer classes, in high school psychology courses, and things like that, and just really hammering home that it's not necessarily a glamorous lifestyle, that it is one that requires a lot of discipline and a lot of maturity as well, I think.
Thank you, Maddie. Yes, Nicole.
Sorry, that was so 2020 to talk while still being muted, right? Anyway, I just wanted to add a couple of thoughts, and one just building on what Sarah was talking about, the kind of the historical moment. I think it is also important to keep in mind that every new technology, when it's first introduced, does, we do have this kind of moral panic that ensues. So I really appreciate, Shalini, all the specificity with which you were, kind of making those distinctions. And oftentimes I think we really do just kind of lump in all social media. And so I really appreciated that. But while all the concerns that have been voiced here, resonate with me, I think it's also good sometimes to kind of take a step back and think, okay, so we're using this kind of addiction analogy. Would we use that if we had a child who couldn't put a book down all night? Would we, express fear that they were addicted? And, probably not. And then I guess the other point that I wanted to make was just about, again, kind of thinking about how we talk about these practices and their impacts on us, and just really maybe potentially trying to shift the narrative a bit from around control and move it back to the user. And I mean, I think with some of these self-regulation, timers and things, that we're getting more towards that. And then the only other point that I wanted to make was just looking at the literature on well-being and social media. When you overall, the effect sizes are quite small, the meta-analyses show, but then I think, and this is really where the film resonated with me, was when you look at gender differences, for instance, and young people, that's when I agree there really are some concerns there. And I, and when I think about those 4 kind of young people that were, the 2 guys, the beatboxer and the dancer, and then the 2 women, and how the different language that they used around their experiences, and the, the young activist having to kind of like hide her activity in this socially accepted makeup tutorial. I really just, that whole kind of gender piece really, I found interesting. So I'd love to just hear if you had anything to add on that, Shalini.
No, thank you so much for that. And I appreciate you giving us the balance of the positive side of some of this technology, because I think that is the question, is how do we get, I think some of this stuff on TikTok is massively creative, by the way. And I think the question is, how do we get the benefit of these technologies without getting all the harms?
Yeah.
And I think when it comes to young women and girls, the data is indisputable of what it is doing to a generation of young girls. And the only reason we have some of this data is because of whistleblowers, because Instagram, had the data for 2 years and hid it. That their technology, you wouldn't say it.
Well, I mean, if you look at those reports those weren't, yeah, I mean, those were kind of more user studies, as I understand it, but.
From the research I've done, what I've discerned from what this whistleblower came out with was that this was clearly causing higher levels of anxiety, higher levels of even feelings of suicide.
That's there. Yeah, there's other research that does show that.
Bulimia, like eating disorders of all sorts. And I think some of the issues is that, and also that there is this also with TikTok in particular, there's this predatory nature in the beginning when adults could access kids on the platform. And I know young women who got solicited multiple times by adult men on TikTok and wanted pictures of them when they were younger and things like that, of that sort, because of having access. And I think in any kind of online space, it's always women that are disproportionately sort of impacted by these kinds of harassment and safety issues. But I think with mental health, especially, this has had a far bigger impact on women and young girls. But that is to say, like, I know the health and well-being, but from everything I've read, Gen Z is having a health crisis. This generation is having a mental health crisis. It is endemic. And I so applaud you for getting off TikTok when you noticed the anxiety that it was causing you, and that it was making you mentally unhealthy and unwell, and paying attention to yourself and saying, how can I moderate this technology so that I can feel better about myself? And I think what I worry about is that we don't know the endemic mental health harms that this is causing a generation. And all we can do right now is notice how we're feeling, and notice when we've been in that scroll a little too long and our eyes have glazed over, or we have feelings of anxiety when we're rushing to see how many likes we got or how many, and to remember to sort of ground ourselves in real life. And I think there is a difference in the addictive nature in the dopamine hits, and the way that these technologies actually interact with chemicals on our brainstem that are different than a book, that are designed differently and more seductively than a book. And so, and the truth is, as much as I've now made 2 films about algorithmic technologies, and I'm constantly looking for research between artificial intelligence technologies and the neuroscience of how these new technologies are actually impacting the brain. And I think not enough has been done. And I think some of that is because we can't get the actual data from these big tech companies.
Yeah, can I just jump in and say something? Because Shalini, you said something earlier too about algorithmic culture. And I think it's important to note that and just keep in the conversation that the meaning of what algorithms are and how they function, that's not just proprietary, in terms of our lack of knowledge around the specificities of how that works. That's not just proprietary, meaning that's not just about competition among different players in tech industries. That is also very purposefully vague as an industrial sort of strategy, and I'm going to come off as sounding very, very cynical here, but I mean, I think there's a lot of scholarship in critical digital studies has shown that when the meaning of something is quite vague and it's evacuated, it's become a meme-ified thing at this point, right? It's the algorithm, right? Or it knows me better than I know myself, and that's a whole other great conversation that the documentary brings up, I think, is like, what is the meaning of that recognition and all of the different valences of that? But it's really important to keep in mind here that it's not just that it's the secret sauce, it's also that the ways in which publics engage with the operationalization of algorithms is really importantly vague, and it works for the companies as well. Bringing back in the legal procedures, when tech can sort of pivot away from responsibility because they're blaming the operation of the machine, that's another moment where what an algorithm is and how it functions as part of larger recommendation engines needs to be vague so that the blame can be very quickly pivoted, right? So I think it's just important to keep in mind that when we talk about literacy, one of the things that we're talking about is not just having family conversations or having conversations about user affordances, but it's also about the ways in which our access to these meanings is not because we're dumb. It's because there's a real like purposeful vagueness around this in terms of our full understanding of the ways in which these things work.
Could I add something too? Yeah. So Shalini, one of the things you said about how we kind of have a limited knowledge about these things and a limited knowledge about their effects upon our neurochemistry, and like specifically, this question of how it affects our dopamine system. Like these questions are like core to me, and like sort of the specificity of what's different about this platform in relation to the whole history of new media and communications technology. Because like Nicole said, we don't think of there being anxiety about people being addicted to books and literature. But in the dawn of literature, there was concern about young people being addicted to books and literature and the effects it was having on their inner lives, their retreat into fantasy, the corruption of their values, superficiality. There was anxiety in the ancient world about reading silently. Man, somebody's reading silently. What's going on inside of them, right? So like I see these criticisms kind of in that long continuity, but clearly there is something different about it. And that's why I really want to know like how it's different. And I think also about like when I was a kid in the 80s, the older people are always like, these kids, they're addicted to TV and to using the telephone. And we had to just make our own way through that. We didn't get education about that in school. Our parents didn't give us a lot of guidance because it was a new world. They didn't know what to deal with. And I feel very much the same way when I see my son using TikTok. I'm like, that's a new medium, a new form of expression for young people. They're kind of living in a different cultural world and using that. And like, it looks fascinating to me, but I kind of don't occupy it. And then I just think it's weird too, because like I have all these, like, I'm very skeptical of criticisms of social media, but as Svetla said in the introduction, I don't use any social media. I used Facebook for several years, like 2008 to 2012, 13, but I stopped using it because like it made me feel like the now that I was living in was too big. There were too many people that were in my now. And like I was thinking about more people that like were not physically in proximity to me. And it created a feeling of unpleasantness that I wanted to have less of. And then this criticism of like, there's like 100% buy-in with these platforms. It's very difficult to use them partially, right? Like it's very like I always like to think all technology has an off switch and you can turn it off, but it's really hard to turn these things off and turn them back on because there's a certain amount of like required daily engagement to maintain these relationships that they require. So yeah, I'm skeptical about these criticisms, but I also you know, retreated from them myself specifically for those reasons.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Shalini, the breadth of topics and subjects that this film opens is just breathtaking. And I wonder if we have a few minutes left. And by the way, for those in the audience, if you have any questions, please pop them into the Q&A and we'll be sure to direct them to the panelists or Shalini. But I'd like to get each of the panelists' opinion on kind of something that was quoted towards the end of the film. So in the closing minutes, Shelley Banjo of Bloomberg News shared her view that if this story ended today, hands down, TikTok won. She was saying that in the context of the fact that the app had gained so much more popularity and presumably revenue amid all the cybersecurity, privacy, geopolitical controversy that was so widely broadcast in the news media. So how would you like to see the TikTok story end? I'll start with Yanni.
Yeah, definitely. And I was really moved by what Dave just said about like the past generation. We were people like their parents were worried about, oh, these kids are getting addicted to TV, and now my parents, like, or my peers' parents, they're worried about like we're getting addicted to TikTok. But I think finally we will figure out a way on our own by ourselves, like to figure out a positive and healthy relationship with all those technology and social media stuff. So especially talking about TikTok, I quit by myself. No one forces me to do that. My mom's even saying, oh, you're getting famous, girl. And but I decided to aid it by myself. It's my own choice. And so for TikTok, I would like to see that the story would end at a point where people are getting like we are getting more like regulation on TikTok, and just kids will figure out by themselves. Like there will be a positive relationship. And also some of my classmates are still using TikTok, but they're also doing great on their academics, and it doesn't like influence them that much and no longer. Yeah, so I'm pretty positive about the end.
Thank you. Nicole, what are your thoughts? How does the TikTok story end?
Well, I mean, one thing that I guess I would like to see would be a way for users to feel like they have more control, more tools, more literacy, and a way for them to kind of harness the joy and the creativity. And I've done one paper where we were interviewing young people about their TikTok use, and there was one woman, she was Mexican, didn't speak Spanish, and she talked about how at some point on TikTok, she discovered the No Sabo Kids side she talked about, and it was this whole community of other people like her, and she really was quite touched by the fact that she thought she was the only one, and yet here's a whole window into this other community that made her feel not so alone. So I guess I would love to think about, and I don't think I feel like this is kind of the undercurrent of this whole discussion, is how do we kind of keep the joy, the creativity, the connection, the community, and yet put in some guardrails so that, especially with young women and mental health, we have some protections in place. And if that's not going to happen from the platforms, can we work on literacy, narratives of control, throwing away the addiction rhetoric, which really, I think, gives a lot of power, gives up a lot of power in terms of individuals being able to kind of to have agency. So that would be kind of my wish.
Utopia. Maddie, what do you think? Where would you like to see TikTok go?
I think, Well, for someone who writes about the internet and social media and consumes a lot of it, I am very afraid of the internet. It frightens me deeply. So I think, unfortunately, I might have a slightly more fatalist approach to this in terms of, I do feel there will be a point when TikTok and the TikTok style of short videos and scrolling kind of pitters out, much the way Facebook and Instagram and Twitter are kind of beginning to or have already. But I worry about what technology that will then give way to, because also as a writing and literature major, I've also consumed too much media in the vein of Fahrenheit 451 and Slaughterhouse-5, and what is the next most addictive technology going to be, and how do we then combat that in the same way we're attempting to combat TikTok. But on the other hand, I also often feel that I'm growing up in a generation of people that have or are getting a pretty strong handle on self-care and on guarding your mentality. I think a lot, like myself and a lot of young people I know, are diligent about setting timers on their phone for how long you're allowed to be on Instagram, on unplugging for a while, on going on retreats, and just taking care of yourself and monitoring your mental health. I do think I'm kind of growing up in the mental health generation that is recognizing and taking control of that much more. So I do still feel confident about the combative practices of young people, no matter where that technology goes.
Sarah.
I'm so glad you said that, Maddie, because I think that's so important. Shalini, I think the timing of the film was so great. I was thinking this morning as I was listening to the sort of news roundup of the day that, you know, a lot of this stuff is about to be legislated and regulated. You know, it's actually right now in the conversation. So in some ways, this conversation is going to change in a week, you know, or in 2 weeks. But what I really like about the way the film creates this, or it kind of answers your questions, Svetla, like how does the TikTok story end? The film kind of answers that. For me, it's a Gen Z story, and that's exactly what it is. It is a story about how self-awareness is something that this generation has in relation to the ways in which technology and people are mutually co-constituted, right? That level of self-awareness, that level of self-care and mental health work is something that is so admirable. And both, you know, listening to you both talk about recognizing your limits in relation to watching the film is a really powerful thing. And I think, you know, it's funny to think, I always think I'm like, I am my father. Oh, wait, I'm not, because he never had therapy and I did, right? And I feel the same way about your generation. Your level of awareness is just really phenomenal. But also the other things that we see out of this, the cultural codes and conventions of media making. And you know, if we had another hour, which we don't, I would love to hear, Shalini, from you about this, the way, you know, being a filmmaker and shooting in relation to vertical framing, and how, you know, we see this generation be entirely comfortable with like not being alienated from things like establishing shots, you know, and wide shots, and, you know, where your, you know, eyes go in the frame. And there's something really powerful about that, about how how Gen Z has created stories with new cultural codes of media making, and the way that was captured, in the way that you had so much TikTok footage, right? And the way that you probably had to manage that in post and everything. I mean, I bet that's a very long conversation, but where does the story end? It ends for me as a sort of nuanced, beautiful portrait of the relationship between technology and a generation.
Thank you, Sarah. Well, Shalini, with the remaining few minutes, I will turn it over to you. Again, thank you for joining us in today's conversation. Just wanted to point out that, as Saul introduced the Dissonance Event series, it's about exploring topics that intersect technology, policy, privacy, security, law. So obviously we're big fans of your work because all of your projects are so complex and they do live on the intersection of all of these subjects. So what can we expect from you next that we'll be able to discuss like this?
Does this go on YouTube publicly? I can tell you if it won't. Well, I can share that I'm making another film. It will, like, I don't know if I can't promise it'll be my last film about algorithms on another sector of society, which is love and technology and the way technology has changed our romantic lives.
I see Nicole is exciting. I think you have some research on that, right?
Yeah,
So-
exactly.
Yes, exactly.
Fascinating. You will have, lots of
Conversations. But what I do want to say is that, you know, I make documentaries because they remind me that there are everyday superheroes among us. And among the most inspiring are the Gen Z influencers in my film. And I was like what Sarah said, I was the same way. I think I was dating someone younger than me, and he asked me to take a picture vertical, and I was like, no, this is wrong. This is completely wrong. Like cinema, vertical, like we don't do it this way. And I agree with you that Gen Z is the first generation of digital natives and are radically reinventing what this disruption will look like. And I'm so grateful to meet Maddie and Tiani and learn about the ways in which they are redefining their relationship with social media. And I have been astounded by the creativity and the resilience of Gen Z in relationship to these platforms. And it is my hope, you know, that it's conversations like this one and literacy, really understanding the technologies that we interact with every day, and not being, you know, sort of in the your eyes glazed over, but being a participant in these and in how we use and govern these technologies that gives me hope. So I'm so grateful for this conversation and all of the agency that was expressed about how we use these technologies going forward and how we govern them.
Thank you so much. And thank you to our panel. I will turn it over to Saul for some closing remarks.
Wow. So this was amazing. I mean, another amazing Dissonance event. I hated it for it to end. You know, you asked that great question about where will the TikTok story end, and I'm not sure it's going to. I mean, when I look at it as the next thing. So for those of you who are really old, we look at Friendster, to MySpace, to Facebook, to Twitter, to TikTok, to what's next after Maddie and Tiani. But thank you, Shalini, and to the amazing faculty, staff, and students that made up our panel. Most of all, thank you, Svetla, for organizing this and doing such an amazing job moderating, facilitating, and spurring such fantastic conversation. As Svetla mentioned, look for a recording of this session at safecomputing.umich.edu/events/dissonance. If you have any suggestions about future events, write us at safecomputing.umich.edu/events/dissonance/suggest. Until next time, please take care. Take care in a self-care way, if you're especially for those social media users. Have a great afternoon and go blue. Thank you all, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you so much. It was an honor. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.